All right. Good morning, everybody. My name is Chris Wax, pastor at Moody Methodist Church. Here with one of my friends, Michael.
What an intro.
Thanks. I've been practicing
You've
all
got a
week.
voice made for radio, Chris.
I know. If this pastor thing ever doesn't work, more like when this pastor thing doesn't work out.
It's only a matter of time, y'all. You've lasted longer than I thought, though.
I know. You and me both. My wife tells me the same thing.
So, my name is Michael Ginger. I'm the pastor of Central United Methodist Church here on the island.
I know. Yeah.
This is great.
This is great. This has been a long time coming, like you said.
Too
This is a
long.
monumental moment.
Yeah. Well, depending on how this goes, it may be a long time coming.
Yeah,
again,
maybe
so.
short-lived. Vincent is on his way down now to
Exactly.
have a word with us. So, man, well, for the sake of my community who may not know you, want to tell us a little bit about you all and your church, kind of stuff. Some of them may know you from your glorious social media posts that I just copy and paste.
Yeah, or like
take credit as my own.
The post office. I think my face is still up there.
In the
most wanted.
Hey, we got him.
Exactly. My name is Michael. I serve at Central Methodist Church. Been there for about 5 years now. Central's kind of a fun restart thing. You know, the church has been around since 1885. Mm-hmm. So with this like COVID stuff, no big deal because we've seen 1900 storm, we've seen like the yellow fever epidemic.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, all of those fun things.
Uh-huh.
It's kind of a fun mishmash of humanity that shows up on Sunday mornings, and I feel very fortunate to be there.
That's awesome.
What about you? For my peeps, like that maybe don't know much about you or Moody, or
yes,
I talk about you all the time. So
I know. Yeah, naturally.
Yes.
I write most of your sermons.
My
anyway,
screensaver, actually.
Oh yeah, mine too. No, my name is Chris. I've been one of the associates at Moody for the past 4 years now. I came in 2016, and similar thing. We do a contemporary kind of service. We relaunched like back in 2018 with that, and so it's just also a fun mishmash community too. Yeah. We got all sorts of weird stuff going on. Yeah. So it's good. I dig it. It's been a fun spot. I love the island, so
I'm just trying place to live,
to hide out here. You know, so they haven't run me out yet. So it's been pretty good.
I hope you're here for a long time, man.
Same. We'll see until we go past our Memorial Drive together.
Let's do it, dude. Tag teaming it.
Tag team.
It'd be so fun.
Yeah, I know, right?
No disrespect to Memorial Drive.
No.
The last thing I want.
Michael Jarbo, this is for you.
Sorry. Yeah. Yeah.
So what have you all been doing I know y'all you guys have some cool regular ministries y'all are doing, but especially in now this social or rather physical separation, not our social isolation, but our separate. Hey, how far away are we though?
That's actually, we should check that.
Yeah. I brought a tape measure just in case.
Get very upset. Let me see if we can get that.
Okay, reach that over to you.
What you got?
We are at about 8 feet and a quarter away from each other.
Okay.
So
I think that's
we're like a junior high dance, man.
That's exactly right. Leaving room for the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, exactly. Right? Leave room for Jesus.
A lot of room. So yeah, so we've been keeping up with what the city and the county have been talking about. We're really thankful that the county listed providers of services for economically disadvantaged folks as an essential service.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
We're continuing to provide meals and shower and laundry for specifically our displaced, unhoused community.
Yeah.
Awesome. And then working with UTMB to sort of deploy student volunteers and get people going. So
awesome.
What about y'all? I'm sure it's been busy.
That's good stuff. Yeah, for sure. We're we've had like everybody, and you all moved to some of this online stuff, and we've attempted to move some of that stuff, like so we can do this and things like this and still reach peeps that way. Outside of that, we've got a bunch of miscellaneous things going on with needs. You know, we've still got Meals and Wheels that's running out of here that a lot of our volunteer base, we've tried to just push them over there so people in the community can do that.
Nice.
And then, we partnered with a diaper bank, and some of our Incredible Years people and others who still need like diapers and wipes and things like that can't get it. So one of our staff members was delivering that. And then we're especially, one of the big things we're anticipating too is when we kind of get back to normal, I know there will be a lot of people who right? We're like granted kind of delays or pauses on like utilities and rent and things like that. But for some, hopefully not all, but for some, it will likely be the case that you'll have like 6 utility bills due at once, or a bunch that stack up. So we've been trying to prepare for that, and even just move around some of our resources. We've been working with the Permanent Endowment Fund, and I know some of those organizations have kind of prepared for that. So one of our pastors, Lance, who does Society of St. Stephen's, is gearing up especially for that. I was looking, man. Yeah, so it'll be just that, and day-to-day flexibility. It's like all this rapidly changes, and so you'll never know by what next week we'll need to respond to. So,
and you may have a baby soon.
Yeah, that's possible. We're like 4 weeks away.
That's exciting.
So
congratulations.
Yeah. So it'll be fun. I'll look forward. I'll bring her next time.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Whenever she's born.
I'm curious what she'll think about all this. Speaking of this, what are we doing here?
Well, I compared this earlier off the screen to when LeBron James joined the Miami Heat, prime Dwayne Wade, for all you sports fans out there.
Yeah.
So I would say that is something akin to this. I'll let whoever is listening decide who's who in that metaphor.
I think it's obvious, though.
Yeah, I think it's obvious.
Yeah, either way.
Yeah, okay.
We'll just leave it at that.
No, we just want to give people insight into the joy that is our friendship.
Yeah, and which actually is a joyful thing. And we do have a friend. This isn't like manufactured for TV.
It's true. No.
Get coffee pretty regularly.
That is fair. And we just spitball on 90% of this stuff, and we're like, let's film it and see what happens, since people can't be with us now.
Yes.
But no, we had been talking and working on collaboration on a couple different things, and we've always thought we've joked about doing joint sermon series or joint Bible studies and things like that, and so I'm glad one of these actually manifested. And I figured, well, people are kind of stuck at home, inundated with content. We'll just give them even more content to be inundated with.
Right.
But we think we've got the richest hook, and we're going to tackle, I would say, arguably the best book in the Bible.
And what book is that, Chris?
The book of Leviticus.
Leviticus.
Good old Leviticus. I've never met him.
He's a good dude. He's a good dude. A little confusing.
Okay,
kind of obsessed with animals and sex.
Interesting.
It's a weird combo. They don't go well together.
No, not at all. Why in the world do you think we picked this book, though?
I'm still asking that question as we're sitting here right now.
I'm having some regrets.
Yeah,
Are you?
Same.
Buyer's remorse.
Really quickly. So.
Let's just go to a safe book like Revelation.
Yeah. Let's do that.
Yeah, that's my wheelhouse, really. I think.
Revelation.
Yeah, Revelation.
Yeah. I'm proud of you for not using the S there. That's one of my pet peeves, actually.
Yeah, you're. Thank you.
Revelations.
Well, yeah,
it's not a book.
It's not.
No, just singular.
Hold on,
take notes. I'm teaching you things.
Okay. Yeah.
So no, I think Leviticus is one of these books that people I think are fascinated with in some really deep, interesting ways, but don't know what to do with at all. You and I were talking earlier, and you mentioned it's not a book that's mentioned very often or quoted very often in the New Testament.
Yeah,
only a handful of times.
Exactly. I think there were 9 references. Is something some book told me, and so I just put that down, and I read it, so I believe it.
It's got to be true.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Wikipedia doesn't lie.
No, never. So lack of references, but in our culture, I think an abundance of references.
Absolutely.
And usually in would have been really harmful and problematic ways.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree.
So
no shellfish.
Yeah, no shellfish.
That is very.
I mean, we live on the coast.
I know, right?
Yeah, it's oppressive.
That we're still protesting at Black Pearl later, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's do it, man.
God,
everything's shut down. Though,
yeah.
So. Leviticus is coming to pass.
Yeah, plan achieved.
Yeah, and in some more very serious ways.
Yeah,
for our LGBTQ plus community.
Absolutely.
This has been quick kind of texts of terror. For that community, and even for our Jewish community, I think Christianity has had a really tenuous relationship with the Old Testament, specifically books that deal with laws like Leviticus or Deuteronomy. And our tendency is to say, well, because of Jesus, right?
Yeah, exactly.
We don't need this stuff anymore. And so we like to drop in on the Jesus story without understanding the world that Jesus inhabited.
Absolutely. Because you're right. Jesus, Jesus engaged with the Leviticus even in a couple interesting ways, but certainly that shapes the background of the world in which they lived. And I think you're so right to say, too, that in public discourse, right, senators and theologians and, the spokesperson for Christianity that the news people always pick, right? Utilize, yeah, exactly. It's always the best person. Yes. I don't know where they find them. But right, they are using Leviticus, to promote a particular kind of theology and ideas. And so on the other, on the one hand, we talk about this as such a boring book. And I think there's interesting stuff to be dug into, but we also have to be able to know how to approach it. I think, a lot of times in my community too, people will come and say like, I heard, so-and-so on the radio talking about this book, but how do I actually think about it? Like, how am I supposed to deal with it?
Yes.
And it is our tendency to ignore it and pretend it's not in the Bible. But there's probably a happy medium with understanding how we engage it. And then if we're going to, talk about, how people like, pastors on TV, right, use Leviticus around, human sexuality, we ought to know like how we should be interpreting it.
That's exactly
right. To say that they're not doing it right.
And this is part of taking the Bible seriously. One of the critiques that we get sometimes is you don't take the Bible seriously enough as Methodists or whatever. But I think having this like historical critical approach, right? We want to know how Leviticus was understood by its first hearers, what was being written, what's going on culturally during this time, which will have certainly applications for 2020. I mean, it's a book that's filled with what we do with our bodies, right? And how we care for the poor.
Absolutely.
And wealth redistribution and all kinds of things that have huge implications for today. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot. My real hopes, though, for going into Leviticus is that, this is a book that deals explicitly with, like, bodily secretions and health issues. So I'm convinced there's got to be a cure for COVID-19.
I wholeheartedly believe that. I think we got to figure out a way to monetize this first, you and I.
That's the reason I got into ministry.
So we're going to drop a link to our Patreon down below.
Please
feel free to fund us. We're going to do verse by verse, and there are 859 verses. So we're at least chunking off the next 15 years of our life to walk you through this one verse at a time.
Yeah, exactly.
So please support us.
The irony is we are just doing one verse today.
I know, right?
I love that. But we promise more next week.
Yeah, 2 and 3 next week, I think.
Yeah, so I think Leviticus is simultaneously like the worst book and also the best book in Scripture. And it's just full of gifts in a lot of ways. So but it's also full of some really wacky things.
Absolutely.
Right? And I think there's a lot of stereotypes. I think I am a walking anti-Leviticus billboard. Right?
You're doing really, so you've got a tattoo, right?
Which is explicitly prohibited in the book of Leviticus.
Wholeheartedly. My cousin actually has that verse tattooed on him somewhere.
Which is incredible.
I know, right? I think on his arm or something. It's just like it's like Leviticus 11. Is it? Do you remember?
I don't remember.
We'll get into it off the top. But he's got that tattooed.
Incredible.
Yeah. What's your shirt made out of?
All kinds of things, which is a big no-no.
Yeah, right? You're right. You cannot have clothing of 2 different types of material.
Yeah, that's not good.
Yeah,
that's not good. We talked a little bit about shellfish too.
Yeah,
right?
shellfish, no shellfish.
But there's all kinds of interesting things in here that you can't do. Some strange, no touching dead animals, which I've mostly gotten out of my regimen. But,
I gave up hunting actually for Lent.
You guys are about to have a baby. Right? A baby girl.
Exactly.
Which means, I don't know if you've told your SPR yet, but that means that Diana can't come to worship for at least 66 days.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to send them an email right now.
Yeah, and you, if it's a boy, it's only 33 days.
Oh, yeah, naturally.
But as a girl, twice
60,
as long.
Naturally, it makes total sense.
I'm glad we're both men talking about it.
I see nothing wrong with
this.
Nothing
problematic with this.
Nope, not at all.
Yeah, so it's a weird book full of like lots of confusing and weird things, but I'm hopeful that our time together, if we actually get into content today,
if we can stay focused long enough,
we'll hopefully like let people in a little bit.
So.
Yeah. So Leviticus is some weird things. What is Leviticus not?
Chris? That's great. That's a great question. One of the big things I would think it's not, and this is probably one of, I would say, the biggest stereotypes of the book, is that it's not just rules. Like it kind of is, but it's more than that, you know? And one of the things I think is probably common between both our communities is the population of people who have at one point in their life they grew up in a church setting and then maybe were burned by that or frustrated with that and stepped away from it. And I know from our conversations we both have people that fit that demographic.
Absolutely.
That maybe come back in kind of curious, appropriately skeptical, right?
Yes.
And I always make the joke. One of my English teachers in college called his class like AP English Recovery.
Yeah.
Because like you burned from your high school English class being all about the testing, and he was like, I just want you to discover just the joy of reading again.
Yes.
Like I want you to enjoy reading a book.
Yes.
And in a lot of ways, I try and think of our service like that in some ways, just to make you like be like, okay, not all churches are like my experience growing up.
Right.
Because people have had some really terrible experiences, where their church was just all about money. And they're pastored by some kind of charlatan who's like, we're going to take 3 offerings today.
You're talking about Central?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah.
Are you guys down to only 3 now?
We've cut it back a little bit.
Okay,
Yeah. This whole virtual giving thing has really messed with
I'm really proud of you.
buying that plane, baby.
Yeah, that your second one or your first?
This is just number 1.
Okay, yeah.
Starting slow.
I love what they're doing over there. Man, you guys are all about the money.
Yeah. But these folks that have experienced some really harmful things, right, that are coming back and encountering with that. So so you're suggesting that Leviticus is not just a list of like really narrow rules.
No, I think it's I think what we're going to discover, and we'll talk a little bit about this today too, is that we shouldn't think of it as a framework of like, we have this vengeful God, right? Some of we were talking about this earlier, right? Some of our theology around God, or some of the bad theology around God is, right, that there are sort of essentially 2 gods. You have like happy-go-lucky, joyful, peaceful Jesus.
Yeah.
And then you have like Jonathan Edwards, sinner in the hands of an angry God who is just like foaming at the mouth.
Dangling you over the fire.
Exactly. And like ready to throw lightning bolts at you at any moment. Yeah. But thankfully, happy-go-lucky Jesus intervenes, right? Yes. But that this God over here, if we break any of these 616 laws, like if I see you eating an oyster, like I am smiting you to hell.
Yes.
And I think that's such a bad and broken kind of theology.
Yeah, and really misses the point of a book like Leviticus, which is actually, as we'll see in just a second, freeing people to live like full lives instead of being this very narrow, constricted.
Exactly. Piece. Yeah. And so I think. That's one of the key things to say when we're digging into Leviticus, that we have to peel back for us, both pragmatically and even at that joking level where, we joke how like, oh, if you're reading the Bible, do like Genesis, then Exodus, then like skip over to, Kings or something like that. Or, in all those Bible reading plans, they put Leviticus at the end.
Yeah, right.
It's like the last bit of the marathon for you.
Exactly right.
That, so.
Yeah. So Chris, I did a Google search.
Okay,
I just typed in why Leviticus, because for me, like I was wondering, like why are we doing this?
Why are we
now,
doing
right?
this?
And the top five things that popped up when I said live, why Leviticus?
Okay.
So to fill in the blank, like Google does, it
Yes.
says why Leviticus is irrelevant, why Leviticus is boring,
absolutely,
why Leviticus is so hard to read, why Leviticus repeats itself.
Yes.
And the last one I think is the best. It was why is Leviticus in the Bible? Like it was just it's a great critique, right?
Yeah,
like,
you're right.
Why is it in the Bible? So why don't we just dig in? You ready for that?
Let's do it.
Read some Leviticus. I want our communities to notice that I brought my Bible today, and you did not, Chris, which I noticed. So, but you have it memorized.
Yeah,
right?
I don't need a physical copy when it's all written in my heart, Michael.
See, Chris is you're the LeBron James of pastors.
I am. I'm
a
glad
big
that
reveal.
I'm glad you picked up on that reference. I'd like to announce that I'm taking my talents down to Galveston.
Yeah, beautiful. We're glad you're here, man.
I'm glad to be here.
So let's start Leviticus 1, verse 1. I think starting at the beginning is a good place to start. So.
Do you want me to read it?
If you would like to.
No, I'll let you read it. It's okay.
For being the guest here. Okay, Leviticus 1, verse 1 says, the Lord, this is also the New Revised Standard Version. So, the Lord summoned Moses and spoke to him from the tent of meeting, saying, and I think that's enough for today. Let's just stop with verse 1. It's a lot of content.
I know, right?
I'm actually serious. That's all we're going to talk about today.
I sound.
So, what I think is so interesting, there's this tradition in the Hebrew scriptures of naming books of the Bible after the first significant word that pops up.
Yeah.
So Genesis, for example, right, in Hebrew, it's Bereshit bara Elohim. Which
wow,
is,
flexing on us.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I Googled that real fast before I looked it up. Probably butchered how you say it.
No, I think you nailed. You said it with confidence, so you nailed it.
That's it. That's all that preaching is. So there's been this tradition of naming the book of Genesis
Yes.
Bereshit, which is in the beginning, right? And that's what
Exactly.
Genesis literally means. Leviticus, I think actually, unfortunately, was named Leviticus, which is actually not a word that appears in the first sentence of Leviticus.
Yes.
It comes from what I was reading, looks like a Latin translation of the Hebrew Scriptures, where they added the title Leviticon,
Yeah.
which my Latin is pretty bad too, but
That's okay.
it's like Comic-Con.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
come dress up like your favorite Leviticus character.
Exactly.
Maybe. Leviticon.
Are you going this year?
Oh yeah, it's exciting.
Leviticon.
already
I know,
bought
I
my
can't wait.
tickets,
I can't
assuming
wait.
COVID doesn't
Yeah,
cancel.
what are
it.
you dressing as?
I'm not sure yet. So
Man, I've got a really strong Moses cosplay
Good.
kind of that I've been doing for a
I'll
couple
be excited
years.
to see that, man.
I've really refined it.
So like Leviticus and Leviticon, right?
Uh-huh.
Have this. They give you this impression that the book is about the Levites, right?
Yeah,
This,
exactly.
like, class of priests. And I think leads to some of probably the disengagement of folks saying this is
Exactly.
about like boring folks like you and I who are
Yeah.
doing church ritual stuff.
We are really boring.
I think
folk.
we've proven that over the
I
last
know,
couple
right?
minutes.
I don't think many people have even made it this far.
No.
To doubt by now.
Yes. So so these Levites, which immediately says if I'm not in this category, I don't need to engage.
Exactly.
I'm out, right? But in the Jewish tradition, the book is called Vayikra,
Uh-huh.
right? Which is not the little blue pill, just to clarify.
Noted.
Very
Okay.
different.
Yes.
Though those kind of issues are addressed in the book.
They are.
Vayikra literally means he continued calling.
Uh-huh.
Okay, and so you see that it's this phrase when the Lord summoned Moses to the tent of meeting, saying, right, continued calling. Vayikra, he continued calling. And so, as we were thinking about this and prepping for this, it made me think like, well, continued calling.
Yes.
What was being called beforehand,
Exactly.
right? And so dropping into Leviticus, instantly, just reading this first verse, there's a story that's been going on before this.
Uh-huh.
It's sort of like we're dropping into season 2 and we're asking, like, who is the Queen of Dragons?
Yes.
Right? Which, did you Game of Thrones fan?
I watched like the first season and I never picked it up.
Oh. Yeah.
This is my confession.
This is embarrassing. Wow.
Do you have an HBO like Go password I,
I
could
do,
borrow?
if you want it. You
Okay,
can have it,
yeah.
I'm not going
Thanks.
to broadcast that.
Okay,
here, but
just
you're
let me
welcome.
know.
You're welcome to watch that. What are you watching right now?
So we just finished like season 3 of this spectacular show called Broadchurch, which is a spectacular series if you're interested in like kind of crime detective. It's like a British show. Like great actors are in it. The current Doctor from Doctor Who.
Oh, it sounds good.
The former Doctor David Tennant.
Yeah.
It's spectacular. And then we just jumped to like Jack Ryan. So we watched the first episode.
Okay.
Of that, like
That's the one with Jim?
yeah, it's so after he left Dunder Mifflin, he has this really weird career turn, and he goes into like government kind of work,
Which fits perfectly in with this, right?
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
you
yeah.
just drop in, you don't know his whole backstory.
Exactly.
With Pam and everybody.
I don't know what happened to Pam though.
Yeah.
It's kind of awkward. I think they.
Maybe she and Roy got back together. I don't know.
Oh, what are you watching?
Let's see. So, just finished getting caught up on Better Call Saul.
Oh,
Which
nice.
is
I didn't do
great.
that.
Huge Breaking Bad fan.
Oh yeah,
I think it's one of the best shows ever.
100%.
And then I'm rewatching Westworld right
Okay, yeah.
now. I haven't gotten to season 3 yet, but what's the guy's name from Breaking Bad who plays Jesse?
Oh,
Paul.
yeah.
Somebody?
Oh yeah.
Paul.
Paul.
The Apostle Paul.
It's the Apostle Paul.
We only get one take at this, right?
yeah,
So,
yeah.
Yeah, he's in season 3. So I'm looking forward to getting up to season 3. But yeah. So anyway, with this whole Vayikra thing and like God continued speaking, right?
Yeah.
Like our favorite shows. If you were to drop into Broadchurch, probably in season 2, you'd be
Aaron
like-
Paul. Just
Aaron Paul.
Yeah,
there
that
it
was
is.
gonna
And it
bother me.
Paul. Yeah.
and I wouldn't have been able
I wanted
to
to say Paul Rudd, but I was like, that's. I'm trying to
What,
imagine Paul Rudd.
what a
in
weird
Breaking Bad.
casting choice,
Wouldn't
man.
it be weird? Yeah.
That magnets.
Yes.
Science.
Yes.
You're right. Like Breaking Bad is such a show that if you
Yeah.
start at season 2, you will be like, "What in the world
Exactly
is going
right.
on?" Right?
Or even watching Better Call Saul, which has all these Easter eggs
Yeah.
for folks that have already watched Breaking Bad.
For sure.
You wouldn't pick up. It wouldn't make sense. It would become this really weird kind of show. And so Leviticus is really dependent on what becomes before it. So to start our study on Leviticus,
Yes.
we actually got to go back to Exodus, right? To understand
idea.
what was the first calling when God is doing this.
Absolutely.
And Exodus is a fascinating book. It's sort of like I had a Old Testament professor that said basically like Exodus is the entire Old Testament is about Exodus.
Yeah.
Right? It's either the story or it's commenting on the story.
Absolutely.
I mean, even understanding Jesus, I think, is really a retelling of the Exodus story.
Yeah,
in a lot of
Matthew.
ways.
I always say when I preach on Matthew, his only goal is to retell the Exodus story, but now with Jesus, right?
Exactly
And
right.
he has no shame in hiding the fact that that's exactly what he's trying
Yeah,
to do,
it's
right?
his retelling. It's
And it's like if you have any trouble ever interpreting the Bible, just go back to Exodus, and there's probably a parallel moment.
Yeah, which is really good news for us. That
Yeah,
it's God
absolutely.
who's in the liberating business, right?
Absolutely.
Business.
Business.
The Hebrew there.
Business.
So, yeah, so Exodus starts off in a lot of ways with the profound absence of God, right? These people, the Hebrews, the Israelites, they're under oppression, Egyptian.
Yeah.
They're the slaveholders. And so, like, reading, I'm going to pick up in Exodus 1, verse 13. We'll read 13 and 14. It says, the Egyptians became ruthless in imposing tasks on the Israelites and made their lives bitter with hard service. This is all that slavery stuff. In mortar and brick, which I think is probably an allusion back to Babel, right? I mean, these Egyptians are empire building, which is, of course, on the backs of the vulnerable, the oppressed.
Absolutely.
And in every kind of field labor, they were ruthless in all the tasks that they imposed on them. So you immediately have these people that are just, being super oppressed, being held down. They're part of this building project for the Egyptians. And I think what's significant, especially for Leviticus, and what we'll get to later, is that this is much more than just like Pharaoh's being mean to me, right?
Yeah.
But this is like systemic. This is built into the ordering of the way that the world is at this point. And so verse 11, right, I think picks up on just an example of this. There's lots of things, but it says, therefore they set taskmasters over them to oppress them with forced labor. They built supply cities, Pithom and Ramses, for Pharaoh. And supply cities, I think what's significant about that is, right, so these Egyptians are working. They're already, like, getting food for Pharaoh. They're feeding Pharaoh and Pharaoh's people. Then you build these cities. Supply cities are going to store all that extra grain. And inevitably what's going to happen? There's going to be famine.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And so then these oppressed people have to go back and get the food that they themselves grew, produced, and then pay Pharaoh for the food that was already theirs. I mean, this is systemic injustice.
Exactly. And I think it's interesting, too, storehouses are in the Old Testament, I think, always associated with kingship and always in a really bad way. And so jumping to another text, 1 Samuel 8, which is when Israel wants a king, and God's like, this is a terrible idea. And they're like, no, we want to be like Pharaoh, who's got these storehouses. And it's that measure of security, right? That if something bad ever happens, we're prepared. And God is trying to say to them, no, like, I've got you. Just believe in me, right? Trust me. But it's that, like, circle back to that sort of way of life of Pharaoh and what they know. And so it's like they're sort of in this position of, like, executing that for Pharaoh, but then it becomes the kind of way of life that they know too, which is really interesting.
Yeah, it's really interesting. The oppressed eventually become the oppressors.
Yeah,
I think is significant for Leviticus.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah, that's really good. So Egypt is ordered in this particular way, right? There's very clear power brokers. The wealthy, the powerful are on top. You have these oppressed, marginalized, vulnerable communities that are very much on the bottom. So you have like the free and the enslaved. You've got people with more and people with less. And it appears at this point that there's absolutely nothing the Israelites can do about this, right? It's sort of this hopeless situation, and they're in despair. And I think this raises good questions for us about the way that our world is ordered. I mean, in some ways, I think you can see this Exodus narrative, though we don't have pharaohs and slaves anymore. I think there's a lot of parallels to 2020.
No, absolutely.
And I think our virus is actually exposing a lot of these power dynamics right now.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, there have been ways in which it's been that temptation for people to like write storehouse things, and that we've seen from like groups that have been like, no, you know, you don't have to do that. You know, you'll still be able to go and buy your toilet paper and things like that.
Yes.
But that like we always default back to that sense of security. Walter Brueggemann has this great, the Old Testament scholar, has this great essay that's called like the myth of scarcity, right? And that especially in Pharaoh and the Old Testament, like Pharaoh operates under this idea that resources are scarce.
Yes.
So he has to build these storehouses so he can store all of the resources for him.
Yes.
And
at the expense of others.
Exactly,
right?
at the expense of others. And maybe for those who like can broker in power, right? They have something to offer.
Yeah.
And then he contrasts that with, you know, some of the later Exodus narratives, like, and he calls that the liturgy of abundance, to say like God operates out of this place of abundance.
Yeah.
And stop me if I'm jumping ahead, but I think the text that he uses for that is like the daily bread kind of moment, because that's like one of the first things that happens outside of Israel getting out of the Red Sea, right?
Yes.
Is that they have that the daily manna from heaven, where God is like, you can only like pick up 1 day's worth of bread and quail. It's like one per person, right?
And what happens whenever they take too much?
It rots, right? And
Exactly.
it goes bad. And it's like only on Saturday, or, it'd be Friday, I guess, right before the Sabbath, can you grab 2 days worth to kind of get them
So you don't
into
have to work and all
exactly. So you can get them into that Sabbath cycle. So it's like one per person, bread and that, because you don't need more, because tomorrow I'm gonna be back with more food today, kind of mentality. And that's supposed to be like, I think back to the whole grain storehouse thing, bread's made out of grain, and that's supposed to be this kind of like visual contrast to say you don't have to store it in storehouses. God is like here each day, that resources are not scarce. But yeah, it's that temptation of people in power and that kind of power structure to say like, we need to secure our power, like, because power is always threatened from below.
Correct.
Like those, who seemingly are going to disrupt the status quo, right?
Right. And I think your examples with toilet paper, but also like access to medical care
Absolutely.
right now, right? Thinking about some of our poor communities that may not have transportation or access to food and grocery stores. I think this virus thing is a really interesting chance to reflect on our own power.
Yeah.
And while we don't have kings anymore, we still have multinational corporations,
Absolutely,
and the CEO and all these kind of things, which all bad, but something we got to be careful of. I think.
Exactly.
One of the things that I find so fascinating is so these while they're oppressed. These Israelites, right? They keep having babies. They keep growing. They're multiplying. This makes Pharaoh upset. And there's this little verse just tucked in there about verse 20 where the midwives kind of refuse to kill these babies like Pharaoh asked them to. And it says in verse 20, so God dealt well with the midwives and the people multiplied and became very strong, which I think is this beautiful reminder that like oppression doesn't always stamp out belief, right?
Absolutely.
I don't know if you've seen any examples of that during this time of people but we're just filled with stories, at least at Central, of people that are their faith is being strengthened in the middle of really difficulty. We've got one woman in our congregation who she worked as a prostitute for many, many years. And I love to ask people like that these questions of like, I don't know if I would have faith. You talk about these de-churched folks in Moody's community, right? If I went through something like this, I think I'd be out. So I asked her, I said, why do you still have faith? She said, Pastor, I got me some spiritual cojones, is what she said. And she went on to ask me if I knew what cojones meant, right? And I said, yes, I do. Yes. So we talk a lot at Central about spiritual cojones, right? And I think oppression, in some cases, it's easy to romanticize this in a problematic way.
Yeah, you're right.
But you can certainly see these glimpses of the divine still breaking through, even in the middle of oppression.
Yeah, no, that's not really good. In the history of theology kind of stuff, that really good, like all sorts of writers, a great deal, like Jürgen Moltmann comes to my mind, like writing a great in that kind of like that God is, especially breaking in the crucified God, what we see in the crucifixion, since, we're Lent and almost there pretty much, right? But what we see in the midst of that is like a God who kind of prioritizes, like, and is there with hope for those who are suffering.
Yeah.
Another Gustavo Gutierrez, right, talks about the preferential option for the poor and that kind of thing, so that that there is this almost essentially prioritization or real presence, and that you're right, we shouldn't like romanticize or all the bad things that we could do to that.
Sure.
But to recognize, we can't also, it's the tendency, especially one thing I'm always conscious of as a pastor at a church like Moody, right, is to inversely not retreat ourselves from that.
Yes.
I did a Bible study online a couple days ago, and I used the Mark text about Jairus and Jairus' daughter, but then Jairus gets interrupted by that unnamed woman who touches Jesus.
Right.
And I kind of they're like two very opposite but similar stories. And that part of her fear in the reaction, if you remember that story, she touches Jesus's cloak to heal herself of hemorrhaging.
Yeah.
But part of the fear is, right, that her being a person in essentially like this lower class, outside marginalized group, is that right, she took away his power by like contaminating his holiness. And so it's like when Samson cuts his hair and loses his power in the Old Testament, her fear was like, oh, she took away his power. But then Jesus kind of turns around and is like, oh, hey, daughter, right? He's the first one to recognize her humanity and say, like, you who's on the outside is now in the middle.
Yes.
And so I think it's important to, for a community like ours, who can be well off with resource, maybe to also remember that, we can't see anybody as someone who will contaminate us.
That's
right. Which is an odd message to preach amidst COVID-19,
Yes.
and was a weird dynamic to say, we got to be careful.
But important when we're talking about fundamental humanity, right? And especially
Exactly.
with some of the ways that the virus has been talked about with certain people groups and things. You know, it's been important.
For sure. And you're right wholeheartedly to say, too, that's been the unfortunate thing to see, right? It has its originations in China, but we can't apply that onto just,
That's exactly
any kind of Asian person that
That's
we
exactly
see.
right. Super problematic.
But that's what happens,
Yes.
unfortunately.
Yes. So, yeah, I think it's a nice transition with kind of the next part of the story where so there's these people and that they're crying out. So we're going to pick up in chapter 2, verse 23 of the story. I just want to hit these snapshots. We're not going to read all of Exodus, but it says, the Israelites groaned under slavery and cried out. Out of the slavery, their cry for help rose up to God. God heard their groanings, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God looked upon the Israelites, and God took notice of them. So, I mean, they've hit rock bottom at this point, right? They're in this giant wheel of oppression. They've come to the end of themselves. They cry out, and God hears the cry.
Yeah.
One of the things we talk about a lot at Central is how it's sort of the cry that kicks off salvation history and God acting in the world when we cry out.
Ooh, that's good.
You think of Cain and Abel, like one of these first stories. And the question is asked, can you hear the cry?
That's right.
And then you get to Revelation at the very end where it says there'll be no more tears and no more crying. And
that's
when
good.
things are pulled together,
I'm gonna steal that.
Write that down.
Yeah.
So there's this cry out, and God hears this cry, and this is fascinating because it goes with your idea of the preferential option for the poor, which is such a scandalous theology.
It
right?
actually was my idea.
Oh, Gustavo stole it from me.
Yeah. He and I were having coffee.
You look
one
really
day.
good for your age too. You must be 100 years old or something. So.
Yeah. 94.
This
but-
beautiful idea, though, right? That in
Absolutely.
this, the gods of Egypt, right, are really closely aligned with power here.
Absolutely.
And in this story, this all gets flipped on its head.
Yeah.
And this God of the Hebrews now, history is so often written by the winners, right?
Exactly.
And this God chooses to align God's self with those that are on the bottom, those that are broken. This God is fundamentally different. And this cry kicks off this brand new ordering of things that doesn't preserve the status quo, but actually flips things on its head in a really profound way.
Sure.
And so it breaks the monotony of tomorrow, I think, right? I think that's what the cry does is you get stuck in these cycles, especially if you're on the receiving end of oppression.
Yeah.
Tomorrow is always going to look like today. And this cry really changes things. And so, and then we get, of course, the whole story with Moses, right? And that whole thing.
The whole burning
There it
bush,
is.
would you
Look
say?
at that. Perfect. Yes.
It's like we planned this.
We could use some divine inspiration in speaking right now.
Yeah.
So Moses and Pharaoh go back and forth. We know the story.
Yeah.
Led through the Red Sea, and they find themselves in the wilderness, and it all kind of culminates at Sinai, right?
Yeah.
This is the major scene
Exactly.
at Sinai where God speaks to them, and so. And what I think is significant about Sinai is, and it's a story that we see throughout Scripture that I think Christians hang on to a lot, is God is always looking for a body.
For
right?
sure.
The sort of abstract, esoteric is always looking for a very particular, localized way to express.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
so we see that certainly with Jesus and with the incarnation, but we also see it with these people at Sinai. And so again, just a quick reminder of this story. This is God talking to Moses on top of Sinai. This is Exodus 19, verse 5. You've already got this memorized. So
Yeah, I do. Thank you.
it says, "Now therefore, if you obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession out of all the peoples. Indeed, the whole earth is mine, but you shall be for me a priestly kingdom and a holy nation." Which I think is so powerful, right? These people, they weren't just liberated from oppression, but they were liberated for this task, which is being a kingdom of priests, right? A holy nation.
Exactly.
Which leads, of course, to the question that all of our people are asking: what is the role of a priest? What do we even do?
Well,
That's the question.
I would say a couple of things. We drink a lot of coffee,
So much coffee.
and we just kind of hang out at Mod looking busy.
Though you have a new favorite coffee place, isn't
I
it true?
do. Shout out to Red Light Coffee Roasters.
Dang.
Hashtag support local.
Yeah. If y'all want to sponsor us too, again,
yeah,
our
yeah.
Patreon thing should be popping up.
Yeah,
so
we
we're
could
looking
work
for-
out a partnership.
Yeah.
If y'all are watching this,
We will sell ourselves out to whatever corporations want.
100%. 100%. I've learned nothing from this study about
Good.
what we were actually just talking about corporations, power, and that kind of thing. And then we probably work for, I would say, about an hour and a half total per week.
Yeah, if we were doing like extended hours.
Yeah, that's a busy week.
My service is only about an hour. So.
Yeah, and we only dip in. I come like about 30 minutes in.
Yeah.
It's about when they're ending worship,
for
and I
you.
just kind of roll in from my car and walk onto our stage and
Yeah.
walk right off.
This is what priests do, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's exactly
okay, more
what priests
serious
do.
answer. Yeah. I think it's got something to do with like mediating the divine, right?
Yes, I think so. There's we were talking a little about this earlier,
Mm-hmm.
and I was, one of the things too, I'm sure we'll touch on is I was doing some work on the book of Hebrews, thinking about that, which has a lot of touchstones back to Leviticus.
Yes. And lots of things about high priests and what that
Exactly.
means. Right?
Yeah. One of the whole arguments that it makes is, interestingly, basically, Jesus is better than the law, Moses, the high priests, and then the whole sacrificial system. So that's basically 4 out of 4 references back to Leviticus.
Yeah.
But one of the role of priest, you're right, like you get those 3 classic roles in the Old Testament, right? Like prophet, who kind of like big picture vision is to try and point the people back to back to this vision of justice that they're not doing.
Right.
We talk, like the book of Amos is great.
Yeah.
Like that. It's their whole message is like, quit worshiping and like get your relationship
Yes.
right with one another. Like
Yes.
cancel service if y'all are going to suck.
Which maybe
at
isn't
taking
quit
care of.
worshiping, but like start worshiping.
Yeah,
right?
you're right. Start worshiping.
Yeah.
Like, but like quit worship maybe the way you're doing
Exactly
it,
right.
which is certainly apt. We could find groups of like, that are just all about Sunday and Sunday production, right?
Is that a thing?
No, not at all. I mean, your church is like that.
Totally.
I'm trying to
Totally.
wake
No,
up.
if you're there for Sundays,
I
it's,
know, yeah.
it's a mess.
You guys, you're closed, right? Locked up
on
the rest
Sundays.
of the week.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah, put the gates up.
Yes.
Right. So you have that kind of like prophetic role of, you're right, worship right worship through taking care of one another. Then you have the kingly role, which is just awful. Like kings are bad. That's always that.
Always.
And then the priest is supposed to be, right, this role of mediation. And oftentimes it worked out poorly in the Old Testament that priests kind of get in cahoots with kings.
Yes.
Because of
Never a good
powers. Because of power, right? And that's what Jesus a lot of times is doing in the Old Testament, is saying like, hey, power, hey, priests, y'all like cut it out.
Yes.
Stop doing that.
Yes.
But you're right. There's supposed to be this role of mediation. And one of the really interesting things I read was that it's supposed to be like, right, the day-to-day, like daily, ordinary mediation with
Yeah.
God. Like that kind of like taking what is ordinary and regular and like connecting that with the divine.
Which
in
is
this
why
really
I think when we
cool
get
way.
deeper into the book, we're going to see so many examples of like really like agrarian things, right? 'Cause
Yeah.
This culture, or even like as
Sense of life.
they're moving around, it's not these like really fancy religious rituals, though they're hard for us to understand sometimes
Yeah.
in a 21st century
For sure.
context. But it's taking really ordinary stuff. Right?
Uh-huh.
Jesus was the master of this with his parables. And
Yeah,
things.
absolutely.
But finding sort of the extraordinary and the ordinary, or the sacred and the secular, I think you're spot on with that.
Absolutely.
Helping people see that.
No, I think, and that is something that's important for us in our 21st century context. You're right, we're not agrarian as they were,
Right.
but that doesn't mean that there still aren't moments of ordinary that
Exactly right.
intersect with the divine, right?
Yeah.
And it's like we're getting a glimpse into the kind of that life, and we can sort of extrapolate and think theologically.
Yeah.
Like, how does this, or some of the like basic work that we do, and
That's right.
kind of odd stuff like you all did with surfing, right? How is that like an ordinary
Yeah.
sort of thing that's made not ordinary?
Exactly right. Yeah. Yeah. So to kind of summarize all this, like, again, God is looking for a body. God chooses these liberated people. Again, you've been not just freed from, but freed for. And your task now is to go show the world what God is like. That's essentially what God is saying. And so, of course, like, they lose the plot at some point, and then we get, again, God looking for a body. This is kind of foreshadowing incarnation. I think it's some really
I think so
beautiful
too.
ways.
One of the quotes that I read in doing research for this, because we did in fact prepare people
Look at you go.
Yeah, but one of them, they were
LeBron
making
James.
LeBron James. I practice that they were connecting Hebrews and Leviticus again, and kind of talking about some of the interpretation of Leviticus that Hebrews does. And there was this great quote I pulled out that was like, "The letters to the Hebrew, in fact, locates the work of God depicted in Leviticus in the actual body of Christ." So that's something we'll kind of wrestle with too. But the underlying realities, and they're talking about this guy Origin, but that's pretty boring. We can skip over that. Yeah. And the Christian community includes not only the more obvious sacrificial details of the book, but also the communal laws of Israel's family and civic relationships, whose references ultimately extend to the church as members more broadly, the body of Christ in its personal and ecclesial aspects. And again, which is just this really fancy scholarly way of saying.
Hey, tell me what that means. I have no idea.
Yeah, I don't either. I was hoping you could interpret it for me. I would guess that it's saying something along the lines of, right, what we've been saying, that like our bodies matter in these kind of connectional ways, and that the work of Leviticus and kind of the theology of Leviticus isn't, again, not so much rules that you have to obey to punch a ticket to heaven, right? But they kind of are almost like virtues of what it means to be like the community of God, to say that if we're going to like live into this, we have to, do some of these things for really particular reasons, right?
Yes.
Sure, having savings and storehouses of stuff kind of makes sense under one logic, but it's like we're going to be a people who aren't defined by that, because we recognize, right, that our storehouse, our storage is always at a cost to somebody else.
Exactly right.
That it's like our abundance, or not our abundance, our own abundance, trying to get our own storehouses, right? It's taking toilet paper from you.
Yes.
By buying out Kroger.
Yes. Exactly right. Yeah. No, that's really beautiful, Chris. So God is meeting these people, and all this is again leading up to why we're getting to Leviticus, right? But we have to understand all this stuff ahead of time.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think so. So this is chapter 19 where that sort of happens. We get like the 10 Commandments come soon. Right, there's a lot of details. And then the rest of the book is really about setting up the details for how to set up this tabernacle. It's called the tent of meeting in the beginning of Leviticus, that one verse that we read that's led us to all of this kind of crazy stuff. And Moses gets all these instructions, really specific instructions about how to build the tabernacle. This tent of meeting, which is where God is dwelling in their midst, right? This is where God is located. It's geographical. It's here. And it all sorts of culminates in chapter 40, which is the very last chapter of Exodus. And then we'll actually get back into Leviticus. But reading the very last verse of Exodus, right before our Leviticus verse, it says, "For the cloud of the Lord was on the tabernacle," this is that tent of meeting, "by day, and fire was in the cloud by night, before the eyes of all the house of Israel at each stage of their journey." So, summarizing all this, Exodus begins with divine absence, right? God is nowhere to be found.
Absolutely.
These people cry out. This sort of kicks off this salvation history. God starts moving. And then it ends with this question of where is God? And the answer is in our midst.
Absolutely.
Right? This is where God is. And this is exactly where Leviticus picks up. Leviticus is kind of drafting off of this energy of what happens at Sinai. And there's something about the end of Exodus that I think helps us understand the beginning of Leviticus. Right?
You brought it full circle, man.
We're here.
Wow.
We're here.
We made it.
Yeah. How are we doing on time, by the way?
I think we're pretty good.
Okay.
We probably should wrap this up soon.
Okay.
Not for our sake, but for everyone else's sake.
For their sake.
For their sake.
So
their
I
minds
think-
are probably already blown.
Yeah.
Let's be
Right?
honest.
But I think this is important with this tent of meeting piece,
Yes,
right? So
let's
this
keep
will
going.
only take another 45 minutes.
Okay, yeah.
So, yeah, what's interesting about when Moses gets these instructions about how to build the tent of meeting, right?
Yeah.
Which we, again, verse 1 of Leviticus talks about this God continued calling from this place where God is. God sort of has these like 7 speeches that God gives to Moses about the instructions. And it's sort of almost this retelling of Genesis, right? With the whole 7 days. Even the last speech has to do with setting up Sabbath, which is how the Genesis poem. So I think it's fair to say that at the beginning of Leviticus with this tent of meeting, this is almost, again, like a particularized space that's trying to show us what the whole world is supposed to be like.
Yeah.
Right? It's a very particular place for the universal. So all these abstract ideas like love, freedom, justice, these are all being pulled down into this moment where God is speaking from, right?
Exactly. I like that too. And I think it's, I often want to be kind of pragmatic. Sometimes we can talk in such heady terms, right?
Yeah.
That we're just like, you talk about love and you're like, okay, well, what does that actually look like?
Yeah,
It's easy for us.
exactly.
It's easy for us to preach these sermons that are
I mean,
like,
what is love?
yeah, baby, don't hurt me.
Don't hurt me no
No
more.
more. Dun, 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 dun. Can we fade in the music to that, please?
Barry, hit the music.
No, right? But it's easy, and I've been guilty of it too. To preach a sermon that's like, yeah, you just gotta, love, right? God is love, and people are like, that was great, and you're like, but what? How does their life look different, right?
What the hell are you talking
Exactly.
about?
And this is that like taking these universal, these really big, true kind of concepts, and saying like, here is how Leviticus, right, has that great thing about like you should love your neighbor.
Yes.
And it's like, and here are. And it kind of outpours. Here are actually some ways that you can love your neighbor and the alien and stranger among you, right? Here are some of those ways in which that universal is outworked in the particular in this context, right?
Yes.
In this, pre-century, whatever century.
Exactly right.
Context.
So this tent of meeting then becomes like this very tangible way of seeing what the world is supposed to be like.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure, as you can imagine, you have these people who've just been ripped from a way of life, right? Their identity has been as those that are owned by other people, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're slaves. Their job is to work for Pharaoh. It's this very oppressive place. Yeah. So it would make sense that you would need some sort of guidebook, guidelines of like, what does it mean to be human? I've been an object for like my entire life.
Exactly.
I'm coming into my own. I need to know how to relate to other people. I need to know how to relate to the divine, right?
Yeah.
And so Leviticus sort of emerges from that space, I think, of this is how the world should look, as sort of, again, a microcosm of the entire universe.
For sure. No, I think that's good. And one of the things I always say, I rip this off somebody else, but I don't remember, so I'm going to say I made this up. Yeah. But whenever I preach on Exodus or go back to Exodus, which is kind of a lot, I always like to say, right, Exodus is 40 chapters. The first 15 are all about God getting Israel out of Egypt. Yeah. And then the next, like however many that would be, 40 minus 15, math isn't much.
It's too hard. Yeah.
Something like that. That is all about God getting the Egypt out of Israel. Right?
Say that one more time. It's so good.
Thank you. No, right. First 15 chapters, all about God getting Israel out of Egypt.
Yes.
Then the rest of it is all about God getting, and really not even just Exodus, right? Leviticus to Numbers, Deuteronomy, so on, through the rest of the Old Testament, is all about God getting those Egypt habits, right, out of Israel.
Yes, and you need structure and you need order to make this happen.
Exactly.
So there's a narrow way of reading this text, which I think a lot of us tend to do, which is like it's all these do's and don'ts, and it's very constricting. But really, I think it's God speaking to these people and saying, this is what it means to be alive. Yeah. This is liberating. This is how you should live in this place, right? And interact with these other people. I think especially for folks that have gone through recovery of any sort, or even if you've left a toxic, abusive relationship, there's this space where you recognize that like order and structure is really important because I'm trying to rediscover how I engage with the world around me, what it means for me to be me.
Exactly.
You're coming out of this entire way of being, right? And I think Leviticus is doing the exact same thing here of saying, okay, you once were slaves, but now you've been liberated to be this holy nation, this kingdom of priests. You're going to show the world what God is like. Yeah. You got to rethink how you're doing things.
No, you're right.
And so the scope is just absolutely huge in this. It's not this weird set of rules, but it's like, go liberate other people. Go free other people to be a part of this amazing thing. Yeah,
no, I think you're absolutely right. Yeah, and going back to that priest, I love the language Exodus 19 uses, and I think it really gets kind of brought out into that. But calling Israel to be this kingdom of priests, right? They're this people who are going to mediate God and God's presence to the rest of the world, right? And that kind of builds out over the whole really theology that you see in the Old Testament is like, Adam and Eve, that doesn't quite work. God's like, I'm going to go to everybody. That it doesn't. You have all these situations not working out where God's kind of universal. So God's like, okay, Abraham and Abraham's descendants, I'm going to pick this people, and through them, will kind of my presence be mediated to all people, right? That's
exactly right.
And then that gets picked up with like the church. Cool.
Exactly right.
I know, right? And
so all of this with this one little, the Lord summoned Moses and spoke to him from the tent of meeting. I mean, all of that comes out of this one. God continued calling, Vayikra, right? And that calling again was to bless all these people.
Absolutely.
It's beautiful.
It's good stuff.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
So we'll spend the rest of our 15 years, I think, going one verse at a time and picking out some of these highlights, I think, of Leviticus.
That's good. And so we started kind of digging into this with some of the 5 worst and most whack moments of Leviticus. But let's end this way, right? What do you think 5 good moments, like truly awesome moments
Yeah.
that the people can look forward to. We got to give them a reason to tune back in
Yes.
to episode 2.
Yes. Which we'll be talking about sacrifices next week.
Yeah, definitely.
Which will be super interesting, actually. There's
for
a lot
sure.
to do there. But I think, like, large scale, like, beautiful things about Leviticus, a lot of folks don't know, but, like, the whole love God, love your neighbor thing.
Yeah.
Jesus did not invent that, you
Wait,
know? Surprise.
Oh.
It's from Leviticus, which is Jesus is quoting Leviticus, which is fascinating, right? And so this, like, I mean, so many church mission statements are about loving God and loving neighbor.
Yeah, right.
If we threw out the book of Leviticus,
Then how would we love God or neighbor?
we wouldn't be able to do either one.
You're right.
Exactly right. So that's one for me.
That's a really good one.
What are you drawn to?
One of my favorites, one of the ones I always go back to is Leviticus 25, right? Which Jubilee and Sabbath. So you have these different kind of levels of Sabbath. You know, we all know kind of our habit of Sunday Sabbath, you know, taking one out of creation one day each week. But it's fascinating. We can really dig into the structure that they had this like, okay, yeah, you take a day off a week every 7 days. Then every 7 years, we're going to take that 7th year wholly off. And then after 7 cycles of that, we're just going to hit the reset button and everything is forgiven, right? All debts and things are forgiven. And it's like wild. So I love digging into that.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
That's a good one too.
Yeah, that's great. And then certainly some of the gleaning passages,
gleaning,
right? There's this acute awareness of like the poor and the vulnerable in your
absolutely.
midst. And Leviticus continually links like worship and like justice are not two different, like they're not two different church programs.
Yeah.
We don't have 2 tabs on our church website to click on these things. Like it's the same when you're doing justice. You're worshiping, right? Loving God and loving neighbor. I used this example in a sermon once. It's a snorkel, right? And so it's the same tube for both of those things.
Oh,
and
that's
Leviticus hammers that. So if you cut off one, right? If I'm just gonna love God, but not my neighbor, like the snorkel tube is crimped and you turn blue and you die,
exactly.
right? So we don't want to die. So
No,
I think
you're
this
right.
like this conscious care for the poor and the vulnerable in really creative ways. Jubilee is super creative. The not harvesting the edges of your field, so folks can
that's
get
one
that,
of my favorites.
I think is really creative.
Like, what if we just planted food on the outskirts of our church,
That'd be
right? And
amazing.
it's like, hey, come get some food.
Yeah.
Like, we do like the grace bag sort of thing where you can come in and get some food, which
I
is
love
kind of
it.
cool. But what if we went like harvest? Bring back the field thing.
Make
back,
it literal, right?
Yeah, literal like
Yeah.
that. Why not?
Yeah.
Be a cool
So
ministry.
so I think to kind of wrap all this stuff up, beautiful book. Like I'm
Yes.
really excited about digging into it.
Absolutely.
Problematic when we try to go one to one. I
For
think
sure.
when we say like I take the Bible seriously, therefore I have to take it literally,
Mm-hmm.
right? But instead, it's these broader calls to say God cares deeply about people being freed from problematic ways of thinking and being, i.e.,
Yes.
Egypt, whatever that is for you, your own Egypt.
Uh-huh.
And we want to be liberated to be able to do this really good stuff, which means we're stupid and we need help, right? And so Leviticus becomes this way of thinking, how do
Yeah.
we do that?
Yeah, no, I wholeheartedly agree. One of the interesting things I read too talked about even the theology of its placement, right, between Exodus and Numbers, these two like highly theological books, right? That this becomes the way these people kind of like practically outworked and live that out. And certainly you're right. There's no one-to-one that like we have to begin to adopt these laws, right? But there's a way in which we have to think about like, okay, what does it mean to be a community of Christians, right?
Right.
And what are the kind of like rules in our 21st century
Right.
that should guide our
Yes.
life in these ways if we're going to truly mediate the presence of a God who loves and cares for all people, right?
That's exactly right.
What kind of habits do we have to have?
Yes. So it may not be don't go eat shrimp.
Yeah,
But it
yeah.
may be let's think about like what sustainable food practices look like.
Absolutely,
It matters
right.
what I put in my body, right? When we're talking about things like sex, right?
Yeah.
It may not be the exact same rules that are happening here, but certainly like again, what I do with my body, how that interacts with other people.
Yeah.
That matters. And we should
Absolutely.
talk about those things.
You're right. And that's a good criticism, too, of that sort of dualism where it's like our body doesn't matter because I'm just trying to get this spirit that's
Yeah.
trapped in this body
No.
up to heaven, man.
No, I'll fly away, right?
Yeah. Well, let's end by singing that.
Shall
right?
we? Let's
That-
all circle up,
that-
grab the hands of
hold
the people
hands.
around you.
We're going to pass the offering plates again.
Chris, this has been so much fun.
This has. I was skeptical, but
Same.
no, I'm just kidding.
Thanks for letting me be on your team for this.
Thank you. No, I'm so happy to have come to the Miami Heat of Galveston as one of the greatest players in basketball.
Yeah.
No, this is a blast. I look forward to continuing to get to do this. No takebacks.
Yeah, none
Sorry,
of
man,
those.
we already did one, so,
So we have to continue.
the people need to know. This
And we'll be doing, so we're talking about sacrifices. We'll actually be performing one next week, right? So,
Are you going to bring the goat or should I?
Yeah, let's talk after this.
Okay. You want to do? We have some options.
Yeah.
I think Barry's back there.
Oh. Yeah.
All right. See y'all next
Bye, y'all.
week. Take care.